All right, so we better get started. Um, I'm introducing my friend, Baldemar Velasquez. And I will tell you this. He's going to tell you a little bit of the story about the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. And so when he tells you about that history, he's also telling you about his history. He's been involved in the union since 1968. And I forget what year exactly Baldemar became president, but he'll tell you 70, 71, something like that, 69. Okay, and has been president ever since. In 1967, at the age of 20, he, along with his father and other groups of farm workers, were tired of the mistreatment and harassment, and they formed the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. We refer to it as FLOC. In 1978, FLOC started a strike and boycott of the Campbell Soup Company. And to the best of my memory, here's why. So many of the farmers in Northwest Ohio and in that general area, and even down into little, south of that northern area, grew tomatoes for Campbell's. Well, those farmers weren't necessarily making all that much money either. Of course, they did a lot better than the farm workers who were represented by the union. And so Baldemar and the leadership of FLOC came to the conclusion and the understanding that in order to have a collective bargaining agreement that would provide a sufficient amount of economic stability and rights, they needed three-party contracts: the corporations, the farmers. And so at the end of that strike, after 8 years, that's the kind of collective bargaining agreement that evolved out of that action. That strike concluded after the workers, led by Baldemar and other leaders in the union, walked from Toledo, Ohio, to the city in New Jersey. I forget the name of the city. Right, where Campbell's international headquarters was, and I think is still located. So that really was the momentum that got the union rolling. Baldemar will tell you about the other contracts that are in existence. As a labor person myself, and now a labor arbitrator, I understand the importance of collective bargaining agreements, and FLOC has always insisted on decent collective bargaining agreements between the parties, and the importance of that. I don't want to say too much more because Baldemar will tell you more, but I just want to tell you that his leadership and contributions have been recognized by many groups, including the National Hispanic Heritage Award for Leadership, the National Council of La Raza, the Midwest Academy of the National Council of Churches, and the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, and many, many others have recognized the work not only of the union, but of Baldemar in particular. And the recognition that he has received, not only nationally, but internationally. I see you on Facebook sometimes in other parts of the world, promoting the rights of workers and farm workers in particular. One more thing I'll say, and I'm going to come down. Baldemar was ordained a chaplain for farm workers in the 1990s by the Rafa, and I'm not sure what this is, but Rafa Ministries. He was ordained in 1991. Baldemar is also a songwriter and a singer. He has some recordings out. And when I mentioned that to friends here, a couple of them said, Gretchen and Phil said, could you ask Baldemar to bring his guitar? It's right back here. Baldemar, you're on. And there's some issues with the computer again.
Mind if I stand up? Mind if I stand up, Tom?
What's the problem? Sorry. Yeah.
Can the others?
Can you see? They're all muted, so I can't. Not,
Okay.
they can hear.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you, Tom, for that eloquent introduction. Yes, it really troubled me that so many Mexican Americans voted for Donald Trump this last election. And it seems that it's easier for people to forget where they came from. Or if the problem doesn't affect me personally, it's not my problem. And particularly since many of those Mexican Americans that voted for Trump come from a long history of immigrants themselves. Their parents or grandparents came to the U.S. like my grandparents. That fled the Mexican Revolution of 1910 and came from San Luis Potosí to the Rio Grande Valley, where my parents were born, and I was born there, right along the river. Fortunately, I was born 10 miles this side of the border, and at home, and in a home birth. And so we were raised in pretty rustic conditions in the Rio Grande Valley. And here's the reason why it's annoying to me that many voted for the current president, who's now got some kind of vindictive spirit against immigrants, that they've forgotten the things that other people did for them to rise up to where they are right now. They're businessmen, they're succeeding, a lot of them are middle class, the Mexican Americans, and they don't remember history, what Martin Luther King Jr. did for them with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that allowed them to get into the mainstream of American life. They have forgotten, the things that Lyndon Johnson did for them in the war on poverty, with all the help programs that billions of dollars poured into low-income people. They forget the people that had to suffer and sacrifice to make those structural changes to allow them to be successful and integrate in American society. And now they don't care about other people getting there the same way. Because this country has a history of repeating its hatred of immigrants. I don't care whether they're Germans or Polish or other people. When they came over in waves from Europe, they were always looked down upon. They were always a scapegoat for political and economic problems. So history keeps repeating itself. Nobody reads history. They think that the world started just when they were born. For me, it's very hard to not remember from the early years of my growing up in the Rio Grande Valley and migrating to Ohio, Michigan, Indiana to harvest crops. Recruiters were recruiting us to come work the sugar beet companies in Northwest Ohio, to come pick tomatoes and work in the sugar beets. There was a lot of hoeing in sugar beets back in the 50s and 60s. I hoed so many rows of sugar beets and also did the spacing, because they direct seeded the sugar beets. You had to, with a hoe, space them so that the beet could grow underneath. It's called blocking. So we were paid $19 an acre for blocking. So tomatoes and cucumbers. And then when we got stranded in Ohio, we had to work in the fields all summer just to survive in the winter. And in the springtime, even before school was out, we're out blocking sugar beets. And as soon as school was out, we'd migrate up to Michigan and pick some strawberries, and then the sweet cherries, and then the tarts, and then come back for the second hoeing of the sugar beets, the weeding, then go into the cucumber harvest, and then the tomato harvest, and then the potato harvest, right into the school year. And we had to do that to pay the winter debts and have a little left over for the winter. And just the cycle just kept repeating itself. So I lived in those migrant labor camps up in Michigan, Indiana, and other places. There were hovels, there were chicken coops, converted barns, and stalls, and pretty bad conditions. And the poverty was grueling. A lot of times we didn't have anything to eat in the winter. In the spring, you know, you could buy these little chicks for like a dime a piece. And we buy a couple dozen of them, and we let them out in the yard, just feed themselves and grow up to be chickens. In the fall, they were big enough to start laying eggs. You start eating the eggs in the fall when the work ended up. And then when all the food ran out and we didn't have any money to buy food, we started eating the chickens. So by the middle of winter, we had exhausted all the chickens, eating all the chickens. And a lot of times there was nothing to eat. You know, the poverty was there. It was the worst I can say about poverty is that it was inconvenient, because it wasn't poverty that made life traumatic. I'll tell you what made life traumatic is the trauma of the mistreatment, the ignoring of yourself as a human being, and the way that we would get cheated regularly. Now they call it wage theft. They call it all kinds of other things. And but the gift that I see is kind of like those things that when you go through something like that, it becomes your testimony. It becomes who you are. And I learned this much later in life, but I was angry all the time about these situations and the inability to do anything about it. I remember picking whatever rows of whatever we were picking and thinking that when I was like 10, 11 years old, is this all there is to life? When I'm finished with this row, there's another one just like it waiting for me. And you're barely making enough just to eat, let alone anything else. And so it gives a person a feeling not only of anger, but some kind of fatalistic sense of their life. And then what is life worth anything? So you could go in one direction or another direction. You go a bad way, or you go a more constructive way. I had to find that constructive way. And so the mistreatment was the worst, was the way supervisors, company field men, and people treated my family. They treated my mom. The harsh words, the swearing, the calling of names, the racial slurs. It's one thing that they say that to you, but when you say it to your mother and your little siblings, my younger sisters, that's something that's hard for a young man to take, and you want to hit somebody. And so I grew up just being angry, and I had to do something about it. So when I progressing in school, when I started school, I didn't know any English. But the thing that saved me was the fact that I knew how to do numbers, because when you're working in the fields, when I was being raised in the fields, all through my elementary school years, middle school, high school, even when I went into college, I was still working in the summers, with my parents, helping them finish their pickings and so on. We had to learn how to count, because everything was piece rate. We didn't get paid by the hour. You just got paid by the container, by the bucket, by the crate, by the bag, or whatever you were picking. So I learned to count. I learned to count before I learned to do anything else. So I was good with numbers. So when the teachers look at numbers and connect the word to the numbers, oh, that's what it means. Oh, that's what you picked up English. So by the time I was in second grade, I knew a little bit of English. Third grade, I sort of had a clue about what the teachers were talking about. And so, but that education kept me rolling till I began to read some of the things in the history books about our country. And what government is and what it's supposed to mean. And so why isn't it working for us? And so I started looking into the laws in agriculture, the minimum wages and things like that. And I said, oh, then I got started interested in the civil rights movement. When I went into undergraduate school at Pan American University in Edinburgh, Texas, down in the Rio Grande Valley, it was the only school I could afford to go to. It was mostly a commuter school, and half the population were Mexican American kids like myself. So that was a new experience for me, being raised in mostly white schools in Northwest Ohio. When I'm going back to the Rio Grande Valley, I lived with my grandparents in Farr. Walked 3 blocks to 281 that took you directly to Edinburgh where the college was. And all I was doing, walk 3 blocks, stick your thumb out. The farm workers going to work in the morning up in the fields, and there they see a kid with books in their arms going north. They know they're going to college. So I would get picked up within 5 minutes, and I didn't have to take the bus because I couldn't afford the bus anyway. So there, you learn to crunch the numbers. So I was going to be an engineer, and you have these, what do you call it? You have to do a study thing on the evenings. So my science assignment was having a telescope out in the desert, tracking satellites for NASA. That's what I did as a freshman. And so they didn't have computers in those days. They had linotype machines. So they linotyped the coordinates, or set the telescope that had a camera on it. And NASA would tell us the exact time when they would flash the satellite 6 times, the light on the satellite. And our job was to photograph as many of those lights as we could as part of the tracking system that they were developing then. And so I learned a lot about how we were cheated. And I knew this from the time I was like 12 years old. I knew enough math to figure out how the farmers were cheating us. Like I said, we were getting paid $19 a ton, $19 an acre, the black sugar beets. And my dad, not knowing the English, would ask the farmer, well, how many rows make an acre? So we can count the acres. And they would say, well, 15 rows make an acre. So every 15 rows, we count an acre. So at the end of this field, finishing field, I said, well, Dad, how many acres did we hoe? My dad said, well, I counted 35 acres. I said, Dad, that don't look like a 35-acre field to me. It looks more like a 40-acre field. And so I knew enough math. I know that there's how many square feet there are in an acre. So you multiply the length times the width, and you get the square footage. And so I got down on my hands and knees with a foot ruler, and I measured the length of the field. And then I worked the formula backward to find out what the width was. And so I measured the width, and I counted the rows. It wasn't 15 rows made an acre, it was 13 rows made an acre. So every time my dad counted an acre, we'd done 2 free rows for that farmer. That's how that field shrunk from 40 acres to 35 acres. I said, Dad, they're cheating us. Go tell the farmer to pay us what they owe us. That's a lot of money for us. And so my dad got really angry at me. I said, you go do that and start a fight with that farmer. We're not going to be able to have a job anywhere. They won't hire you. They'll blacklist you. And that was my first lesson. I said, this is not right. Something's got to change. But being an engineer, working to be an engineer, I knew how to crunch numbers. So I realized when I started organizing that to look at the whole picture. Okay, who are these farmers here? Campbell Soup was paying their farmers $34 an acre, $34 a ton. Okay, so I had to figure out the tonnage, in a field, the average tonnage and in a harvest season, and I go back to the extension service, find out what the averages were for the previous 3 years. And because I had to learn, because we're getting paid 16 cents for a 33-pound basket of tomatoes, piece rate. Well, you multiply that 33 pounds into 2,000 pounds, which is a ton, you get 60 something hampers, 60 hampers. Okay, so When you multiply 16 cents times that amount, it comes out to $9.70 something cents per ton. So out of the $34 a ton, little under $10 was just our 16 cents a hamper. So the farmer had to use the balance for all his other inputs, fertilizer, transplants, cultivating, all the things. And when you looked at the statistics from the Extension Service, you figure out it's all math, it's all numbers. The farmer was yielding 18 tons an acre average for the previous 3 years. And the break-even point for him to cover his expenses was 16.1, something like that, an acre. So he was making about 2 tons an acre profit. The average contract with Campbell's to the grower was 40 acres. You multiply that by 40, and his profit margin for the entire season was under $3,000. I said, if we ask for 2 cents a hamper, that's going to cut so much into that profit margin. It's just as well grow soybeans, corn, or wheat. Where does that leave us? Out of a job. So that's how we came to that decision that we had to get Campbell Soup to the table to talk about the pricing in the industry, because it's all in the numbers. It's a supply chain issue, inequity in the supply chain. And that's what that Campbell's fight was all about. It took us 8 years. Everybody said we were crazy. Labor leaders said, Baldemar, you're barking up against a brick wall, because Campbell's will never negotiate with a group of workers that are not their employees, which was their big argument during the boycott. They're not our employees, they're the farmers. Go talk to the farmer. Yeah, you want the little people fighting each other for the crumbs you throw us. I said, that's not going to work. You guys are the deep pockets. So after 8 years of fighting with Campbell's, they did what everybody said they'd never do. They sat down and negotiated a supply chain collective bargaining agreement. We increased the price per ton to the farmers from 34 to 40 something dollars the first year. Eventually, we got it up to over $70 a ton, which allowed us to double our wages and made the company pay for a health insurance policy for all our workers. Because one of the things that we believe for farm workers, they are showered with all kinds of assistance programs, food stamps, and all this kind of thing. But why? They work in this kind of weather, in these kinds of conditions. You would think that a person who works that hard would get a fair day's pay for a fair day of work, to pay for his own food, to get his own health insurance, and to get the kind of sustenance that his family needs. A fair day's pay for a fair day of work. That was our battle cry at that time. So we don't want the handouts. The handouts, all those things belong to people who can't work for some unfortunate reason or another. That's not for us. We're hardworking people, and we don't want to be treated like we're some kind of welfare beneficiary. We're not. We're hardworking people. So give us the sustenance, but give us the respect as human beings. Make people understand that we're human and we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, because that's really what this fight was all about. That's what the fight has always been about. That's what it is now. That's what it was yesterday, and what it is tomorrow. For every human being on this planet, their respect and dignity that they deserve as human beings, and be rewarded for their labor, for what they produce to feed America, to do the products that we consume. And everybody has to survive. And there should be programs, economic systems that are sustainable, not predatory capitalism where people are striving for the maximum inequality in their own favor. That is not the way. So when Campbell signed that supply chain agreement, we had to do one other thing, and that is create what Tom does. We had to create a legal framework to keep the company honest going forward. Because once you take a boycott off, what's going to keep them from just wiping everything away and starting all over again? We had to keep them in the ballgame, so to speak. But agricultural workers don't have the legal mechanisms that other unions have. In 1935, when they passed the National Labor Relations Act, President Roosevelt needed the Southern Dixiecrats to support the law. And their condition for signing on supporting that collective bargaining law was excluding agricultural workers and domestic workers. Because at that time, most agricultural workers were black. And the Southern Dixiecrats couldn't see that black people had the same rights as white people, so they excluded agricultural workers. Now, since then, there's been a transition. The black folks went out of the fields and the Mexicans replaced them. First of all, there were the migrants from Texas and Florida that we came up, like my family, in the 50s and 60s. And eventually we were replaced by the undocumented people, as many of our families spun out of the migrant stream. And now the attack, this mass deportation, there's so much stress on undocumented people that now the temporary guest worker programs, call it the H-2A visa, temporary work visa, is growing exponentially. Last year, about 25% of all the agricultural workers in the US were H-2A workers. Farmers are transitioning to that. And there's a lot of, I could go on and on about that, but that is an very exploitative program. And unless you have some oversight to it through collective bargaining, you're not gonna correct the inequities in that visa program, because most of the abuse starts from the sending country, and our government has no governance in another country. So, but we've been able to solve that with our collective agreement. So what we did after the Campbell's fight, we duplicated that supply chain concept with Heinz USA, with Vlasic Pickle, Dean Foods, and Jane Green Bay Foods in 2005, implemented the contract in North Carolina with the Mount Olive Pickle Company's cucumber growers with the North Carolina Grower Association. And most of those workers were H-2A workers with this visa. And we knew the horrors of that program, how our government cannot correct all of the abuses in that program. Because I've said much of the abuse starts in Mexico. Sure. American farmers can't get enough agricultural workers, domestic workers on their farms today. Maybe there's an exception in California. On the West Coast, because the Hispanic population is huge, and there's a lot of domestic Mexican Americans and others who still work in agriculture there. So there's a bigger domestic supply of labor in the West Coast. It's not true in the middle part of the US or the East Coast. In the Midwest here, you can't get Texans and the Floridans, Mexican American migrants like my family to come and do this work anymore. So many farmers are turning to this guest worker program, but it's very expensive. And so what they've done is that they were allowing on independent farm labor contractors to bring in these workers. The independent farm labor contractors are considered employers by the Department of Labor. It's under the federal law. Unfortunately, the reason farmers are turning towards that program, because they know that the only way that those independent farm labor contractors can stay in business is cheat the workers. And when you hear all the horror stories, like Operation Blooming Onion in Georgia, that the Department of Labor made this big federal case against these employers, they were independent farm labor contractors. They weren't the farmer. The farmer who actually owns the land, plants it, buys the transplants, cultivates it, grows the crop. These independent farmers, they just come in with the crew and do the harvesting, but they cheat them day and night. They start with the bribes for the visas in Mexico, and they come indentured already, so they're at the mercy of the farm labor contractor. And that's one of our biggest enemies, undercutting our collective bargaining agreement in North Carolina. But we protected the workers that we have covered through the collective bargaining agreement. For instance, we put clauses in that allows our workers to file grievances in Mexico over recruiting violations. The first big one we discovered was the bribes for the visas in Mexico. So you get a Mexican fella, lives in the mountains of San Luis Potosí, very poor village. Guy's living in a thatch roof hut with a dirt floor, and the employment is non-existent. So he thinks of coming to the US working for dollars. So he's got two choices. One, hire a coyote, somebody to steal him across the border, a smuggler, and pay him $7,000-8,000. And he has to go into debt. If he owns any property, signs over the property to the coyote in order for the service of getting him to the US and hopefully to make enough money to pay him off. So the other choice is going with his H-2A visa. So he goes to a recruiter for a North American employer. Is I want to go work with this visa. And the recruiter charges him a bribe for the visa. They'll pay as much as $3,000 for it. So I pay $3,000 or $2,000 or $1,000 for the privilege of working with a visa, or I pay a smuggler $7,000 or $8,000. And so either way, they come already in debt. And that's the first thing we discovered in our agreement. The North Carolina Growers Association had 8 or 9 recruiters through various states in Mexico. And we found out that everyone in our bargaining committee, when we negotiated the first agreement in 2004, I asked them how much did they pay the recruiter. At that point, the legitimate cost for the visa, for the interview, and for the inbound transportation was about little under $350. He said, if you pay that recruiter more than that, you pay too much. And there's no one that paid under $500 for that visa. Everyone went from $500 up to $3,000. And so that extortion was continuing at that time. So we did a campaign to correct it. I said, first of all, you guys, if they charge you more than $340 some, report them to us, we'll file a grievance. And the employer has to investigate it under the collective bargaining agreement to set it right. We got 2 recruiters fired, and the word got around. The recruiters started to hate us, not only the recruiters for the Grower Association, but all of the recruiters in Mexico. They saw us as a threat to their practice. So our offices were broken into in Monterrey. And I did a speaking campaign in villages in Tamaulipas and San Luis Potosí. 7 sites, we had no less than 100 workers at each meeting. And we told them, don't pay more than this. If you do, report to the union, will file a grievance. Those who are covered under the collective bargaining agreement. So we did that campaign. After I finished that speaking tour, the following Sunday, it was Easter Sunday. They took our staff person to Monterrey. They bound his hands behind his back and beat him to death in our office as a signal to stop this campaign. And we filed the complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They declared it a political crime and ordered the Mexican government to give us protective measures, which we still have to this day. They've installed cameras, security cameras in our office, showing the outside. When they did that, the stalking stopped. And every time I go to Mexico, I'm supposed to use a cell phone that they gave us, in case we felt that we were in danger. But I don't use it because there's so much corruption in law enforcement that I might be calling the people that are going to after me anyway. So the best policy is go in groups, stay in groups, and blend in with the people. So I think that's what this whole thing led up to. But our operation, that agreement covers, we think this year 9,000 workers on 650 some farms from the mountains to the coast into Virginia. And so, but it took so much hard work to get to where we are. Those campaigns that I was referring to, these supply chain agreements, that did not come without a lot of sacrifice, a lot of volunteerism. And this is why I'm grateful to Tom and Lynn, because in the early days of that Campbell's fight, they were there. Even though the labor movement we were not affiliated, we were not a union, we didn't have contracts, we were not affiliated to the AFL-CIO. Every time I asked them for help, said, no, you're not affiliated, we can't endorse your boycott. And as a matter of fact, some of them oppose the boycott, the cannery workers. They said we're boycotting the union product, Campbell soup. And I said, well, it's not entirely a union product. Somebody's got to pick the tomatoes that go into the can that you're processing in the cannery, and that's us. Lo and behold, when Campbell signed the agreement, we found out that there was a picket line in front of the Campbell Soup Company in Napoleon. It's the largest soup company in the world. And we were just negotiating the agreement in Detroit at the airport with the Dunlop Commission and the company. We had the agreement all signed and ready to sign. So let's come back tomorrow to sign the agreement. We'll be done. And I found out that day that there was a picket line in front of the Campbell's plant. So I said, wait a minute, there's one more thing. There's a picket line outside that plant. And I said, I'm not going to sign this agreement until that picket line is gone. Turned out that the building trades were picketing the company because there was a non-union contractor building an evaporating facility in the plant. And that's why they had a picket line. And I said, look, I signed this agreement. Tomorrow, my Mexican truck driver is hauling tomatoes to the plant from the field. I'm going to cross somebody else's picket line. I won't have anything to do with that. I'm not crossing anybody's picket line, so I'm not signing this agreement until that picket line is gone. I got up and walked out of the negotiations. They came hollering after me, hey, you're bargaining in bad faith. You've got to sign this agreement and blah, blah, blah. I said, I don't care. I'm not a union buster, okay? I'm trying to organize a union. You guys are putting me in that position. I ain't going to do it. And the head of the Campbell's team came out in the hallway, said, hey, yeah, he was a pretty calm guy. And I said, come back tomorrow. We'll see what we can do. That same evening, I said, it's all done. Come back. Picket line is gone. And so overnight, they threw out the contractor, brought in the union contractors and settled the whole thing. And the building trades leader, Ray Medlin at that time, couldn't figure out what the heck happened. So Jack Gallen told him, he said, Baldemar did that? Oh my God, he became my best friend forever. But anyways, to make a long story short, the whole item that settled the whole thing was understanding that it had to be some kind of framework. Since we're excluded from that collective bargaining law in 1935, we didn't have a mechanism to keep people honest. So the first thing I negotiated with Campbell was not the union agreement. It was a memorandum of understanding with creating the Dunlop Commission. Because the person who was mediating this discussion was the former Secretary of Labor, John Dunlop. And he ordered the company to sit with me to talk about the role of the commission and write a document to outline the role. They sent me their PR guy. They sent me the wrong guy. And with him, I negotiated what is essentially a National Labor Relations Board by private agreement. All the concepts of collective bargaining, that the commission had a right to write rules and regulations governing representation procedures in collective bargaining, with the authority to issue fines, penalties, and make whole remedies. Campbell Soup signed. We signed. That led to those negotiations. So every company we've taken on since then, Plastic Pickle, Heinz USA, Dean Foods, Sanjay, in Green Bay, and the Mono Pickle Company, the first thing we ask to recognize the authority of that commission. And that commission is still in existence. It's our mediating group, and it's our arbitration group. Grievance procedure, you try to settle at the local level, and we go to a united negotiation with the employers. And if we don't come to agreement, we submit it in writing to the Dunlop Commission. And they first try to mediate it, and then if they have to arbitrate. And so that it's an independent mechanism that we had to form in order to keep the organizing moving. So we just recently, last year, got our first agreement in a packing shed with 40 undocumented women that packed sweet potatoes to the European market. And those women could not believe that they would have these rights. They got overtime pay, they got paid breaks, they got paid time off for union business, they got 2 weeks paid vacation. They thought when the employer told them that the 2 weeks paid vacation, they thought they were getting fired. They said, why are they giving us this money? Is that they're firing us? They thought it was like severance pay. They said, no. It's paid time off for you to go on a vacation. What? They're paying us for nothing for 2 weeks? That's a paid vacation. They didn't understand what paid vacations were. But anyway, what I'm saying is that in order to keep this going, we have to deal with some very core underlying issues. First of all, FLOC was founded by migrant immigrant workers, seasonal farm workers, migrant farm workers, and undocumented workers. They have been members of FLOC from the beginning. Since 1967, we started organizing. We always had undocumented people working alongside us. I grew up with undocumented children. I grew up picking cherries and strawberries and cucumbers with them. And to us, it didn't matter their status. What matters was their treatment and the mistreatment and doing something about it. And we try to collectivize them all. Now with this national crisis we're facing with mass deportations, it's time to call things out for the right things. You know, I'm tired of people going after the low-hanging fruit. When you know darn well that the real solution is legalize people who have not done anything wrong. They're just here without documents. And legalize those people, give them an amnesty. And people bristle at the use of the word amnesty. I said, well, what do you mean? What's the problem with that? Amnesty, look it up you don't understand English? Look it up in the dictionary. If you tell us Mexicans to learn English, well, you do the same thing. Amnesty means you forgive people for something they've done wrong.
Take a break.
Okay? And so it's embedded in our nation. In our system of jurisprudence. Our system of jurisprudence, they don't call it amnesty, they call it plea bargaining. You get forgiven for a higher crime, you cop to a lower crime. You get forgiven for the top thing. And it goes all the way to the White House. They don't call them, they don't call it amnesty, they call it presidential pardons. Forgiving people something that if Trump can forgive the people that were the rioters in January 6th, why can't he forgive the people that have done nothing wrong other than pick their fruit and food and process their chickens and whatever? Amnesty is not a bad word. As a matter of fact, I made a speech and the first time I got elected to the executive council of the AFL-CIO, because there was a resolution on immigration. I said, no, let's go for the amnesty, folks. Don't worry about it. I said, look, the amnesty means what it says. And we have a nation that's based on our system of jurisprudence, another on the issues of forgiveness. Because sometimes you have intervening causes why someone should be forgiven. Those things should be considered. The state of our nation, the state of everything that's going on, let's take all those things in consideration. I said, plus, isn't that what the foundational belief that we all have, not only as a nation, but those of us who call ourselves Christians? We're the recipients of the greatest amnesty ever given to man. Didn't Jesus come here and forgive everything we've ever done wrong? That's an amnesty. And who are they to not consider this extending it to people who've done nothing wrong except be here to try to feed their families? So I think that it goes the argument that goes on and on, which is what I'm asking you to do today is we have written a resolution on this issue of repeating the Reagan amnesty of '86. As some of you remember, Bill Clinton's NAFTA policy 40 years ago, they dropped the tariffs on the border on corn. Well, corn is a Mexican food staple. All the rural people grow corn in Mexico for their own consumption and sell the access at the local market. But when NAFTA passed, the Mexican corn market was taken over by North America because we have very highly mechanized harvesting. They're not peasants. The farms grow corn for their own consumption. And when they take away their market, you displace them. So in the first 3 years of NAFTA, we displaced 2 million corn farmers. And when they couldn't make a living, they had to go somewhere to survive. So we ended up on our border, and then we are blaming the victim for being at our border that we created. So we have to have sustainable trade agreements, sustainable foreign policies, because not only that, we have supported militarily Central American governments that pulverize the rural populations to clear the way for North American investors. The hydroelectric power industry, the mining companies from Canada and US, and they wash their minerals, with the rivers and pollute the waters and pollute the land at the peasant. That's why they rose up in revolt, the Zapatista rebellion. And Washington's response was, run them out, run them back into the hills. So they did an encroachment policy, the Mexican military with support of the American government. We do this in Central America. At one time, United Fruit owned 1/3 of all of Guatemala, had their own schools, had their own police departments. That's why they call them the banana republics. So we keep on supporting these governments, displacing people, forcing them to migrate, and now they're shooting ourselves in the foot when you do those things. So this resolution calls for a repeat of the amnesty of '86, but tie it to our trade policies and our foreign policy, because those things have to change collectively. Otherwise, we're in a repetitive cycle. We're going to repeat this every 20 years, every 18 years or so, because people are everyone is a migrant here, by the way. Nobody stays in the hometown that they were born and raised and make their life there forever. They migrate. They go somewhere because of the opportunity, the job, whatever. And so you have the freedom of travel. We have to extend the same thing to governments who have agreements with each other, allow the people the freedom to travel in order to sustain their families, and have an immigration system that sets up a proper adjudication of these things, instead of the opposite, right? We're dismantling the immigration system. Trump last week fired all these immigration judges. And who's going to adjudicate the people who are applying, crossing asylum or trafficking or things like that? And then they're picking them up when they show up for their appointments and deporting them. This is outrageous, and this is un-American, and we cannot let this stand. So we got this resolution that encompasses these concepts to hire more adjudicators and make the processing of visas, the applications, more efficient. That's where the money should go, and not giving the billions of dollars to ICE in order to carry on the practice of carrying it out. That's got to stop. And so we're asking you to support that resolution. I can make it available online. So we want individual supporters of it, and we want organizational support. The organizational supporters will be published on our website, and we want to start a town plan on. This resolution was approved by the Inter-American Committee, or the International Union Federation, based out of Geneva. And so we have their support. We had to negotiate the language in it a bit. The concepts have not changed. It's just the language was negotiated around the world to be translated in several different languages for the executive committee of the IUF in order to adopt it. And it was adopted 3 Fridays ago. And now I submitted it to the National AFL-CIO, and I'm asking them to support it, because when they support it, we will have every state labor federation in the United States and every central labor council with an obligation to respond to that resolution. And that we have a ground floor of a national movement to pressure some legislators in different areas of the country to write a law that has those concepts in that resolution. I want you to all read it, consider endorsing it, and as an individual or separately, the individuals will be giving us an email and a phone number so we can text, that we can give you updates on everything that's going on. So with that, I'd like to end with the concept that we have to continue to do really creative things. Like I said, that Dunlop Commission is still, that's our only legal framework that we have. And it's an independent mechanism, but it pushes us to get manufacturers to support it in order to continue organizing the people at the bottom of their supply chains. So the That that commission is now chaired by a woman, Liebman, the former chair of the National Labor Relations Board. So we have very competent people running that commission. They're experts at what Tom does, mediating and arbitrating. So that, in a nutshell, said a mouthful, gets me to the point of supporting that resolution, because we just last Tuesday announced to start getting the people to support it and endorse it. So with that, I'll stop, and maybe somebody's got a question. Go ahead. Well, the first year we walked out of strike, there were 2,000 of us that walked out. I mean, and then we had workers from other farms, other companies wanted to walk out. I said, no, you don't grow for Campbell's. We're not taking on your company right now. We're focusing on Campbell's. We had to push people from going on strike. But if you're a Campbell's worker, we want you. There's 2,000 of us that went on strike. We didn't have any money. We have nothing. We relied on the local Mexican population, like the seasonal workers, like my family and others in Lipstick and Ottawa and those rural counties. They opened their homes to us. That's where my staff stayed, people's homes. I went down with Sarah, and my wife Sarah, and my daughter Satya. Christy was just being born at that time, and we lived with one of the families in Lipstick the whole summer. We were relying on food caravans from Notre Dame University, from Toledo, from other places to feed ourselves. We didn't have, no, we weren't getting paid. We didn't have any money to pay us. We're all volunteers.
Mike Berger and I drive up to Ingram, Michigan. Oh, they're coming back. He's huge.
Well, sometimes it's all it was, peanut butter sandwiches. It kept us going. And but we had to get up at before daybreak every morning to go to the fields where they were picking to greet the workers as they came in. So we had to be there at daybreak. And so we had to get up very early, and sometimes cleaning up after a day and planning for the next day. We were up till 9 or 10 o'clock at night and still a short night of sleep. Did this all summer, the entire summer, until the workers left. But after that strike in 78, we didn't have any money for the workers to get back to Texas and Florida. Turns out that during the strike, it was all over the news, and the National Council of Catholic Bishops was meeting in Cleveland, and they have a nonprofit. They have this fund. What's it called? I forget what the name of the fund is, but it's a pretty big fund. They fund civil rights projects and other things like that all over the country. When they heard about the strike and our need, they issued a one-time largest grant ever issued of $70,000. And we used that money to get the work, give them gas money, food money for their vehicles to get back to Texas and Florida. And we spent all that money just to getting the workers home. Then we recruited volunteers to come back next summer to continue the picket lines. So they made their way back. We had about 100 workers come back every year to be the core of the picket line. So that went on for 8 years. 8 years, they kept it up. And at the end, when Campbell signed, he said, the people who went through this whole thing and came back every year, you inconvenienced them, making us do this to get you to do the right thing. You have to compensate them for their lost time. Some of them got $3,000 or $4,000 a family. So as a compensation for their troubles. But it was very difficult. The march to Camden, 600 miles in 36 days in July and August. And I remember little Hugo Salinas was one of our poster children. Him and Nora Cuevas and Hugo Salinas, they were like 6 years old, 7 years old. We promoted them across the country as the real Campbell's kids. And we had support groups in Miami, in New York, in Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, raised enough money with supporters to put a full page ad in the newspapers
Yeah.
in the country. To
What is it?
Nora and Google were there, the two children, with a picture of children working in the fields, picking tomatoes, the child labor. And these are the real Campbell's kids. And Joel Campbell's nuts with their own advertisements afterwards. But Ugo was on the march to Camden with his family. And a reporter in Cleveland stopped and a television reporter asked her, well, isn't it really hard to be watching? A kid was all sweaty and everything. Isn't it very hot and muggy out here to be doing this in the summer? Wouldn't you rather be in a swimming pool and things like that? He says, yeah, but if we were doing this, I'd be picking tomatoes. This is better than that. so at too bad. Well, when we signed the agreement with the North Carolina Grower Association, it was the pickle boycott, but 84 suppliers were the Mount Olive Pickle Company. They were all in the North Carolina Grower Association. He didn't want to create an association of pickle growers because they were already in this larger association. So Bill Bryan, the CEO, brokered negotiations with the North Carolina Grower Association, and we signed a contract with them to be the collective bargaining partner. But it included growers that grew 30-some different crops. And the biggest cash crop in that whole association was tobacco. So it became like our Trojan horse. We had the pickle growers under contract, all of them. But now we had the opportunity to duplicate our supply chain agreement with the tobacco industry. And so we've been after Reynolds Tobacco for quite a number of years now. And COVID, put a halt to a lot of things, our meetings and things like that. So we're back on the horse now, trying to revive the campaign. So that's where it stands right now, Tom. Yes. Well, we believe that in order for us to, and I'm concerned with the farmers that are suppliers to major manufacturers and retailers, because we have like a strawberry grower that supplies Walmart, Costco. And Costco buys all their strawberries, from Mexico and the West Coast. But those growers on the West Coast are corporate farmers. They're not a small family farms like our guy in North Carolina. So he's at a disadvantage because those corporate growers can grow strawberries in Mexico and import them as if they're grown in the United States. There's no tariffs on it. So it puts our guys at a disadvantage. So we believe that we have to fashion agreements with these manufacturers and retailers to make our growers sustainable, give them a price, they can sustain their operations here in the US and be able to pay our people fair wages. And so, and I've been attacked a lot by these crazies saying that, I'm too much in favor of the farmers. It had nothing to do with being in favor of nothing, it's being in favor of the truth. The truth is it's all in the numbers. If a farmer can't have enough money to grow his crop, to sustain his crop and pay his workers justly, he's out of business. And where does he get it? He's not the deep pockets. The deep pockets are the manufacturers and retailers, just like Campbell Soup was. And so that's the real solution. We have to have sustainable supply chain agreements. We have to have sustainable trade policies. We have to have sustainable foreign policies as well. Stop funding dictators and stop funding these oppressive governments and to cause people to be displaced and cause them to be migrants. So stability is what we want, and we have to do things that are sustainable and that make sense. Our biggest opposition are what the I quoted earlier, the English historian described it as this predatory capitalism, people who strive for the maximum inequality in their own favor, the investors in those corporate companies. That's where the real enemy is. Yes, ma'am.
And it certainly seems like lots of our friends and neighbors pay and their kids go to school and, you know, other big deal. And I'm wondering if there's some way to sort of make it. I mean, you know, your backers out. Just, you know, it seems like that's what they were doing. You know, it's like concentration puts up with a lot of conditions. And then the next generation never abuse.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really hard to. You know, we certainly have. For good reason.
well, there's good reasons for all those things. And I'm telling you that agriculture work is, it's like an athletic competition, really. I mean, it's, you have to train like an athlete to do this kind of work. It is not for everybody. And yes, we encourage people to get education, do something other than do field work. That's good. But the food production system still requires manual labor in those fields. So the issue of whoever is going to be there has to be treated fairly and has to have a sustainable way to maintain himself while he's doing that job. It's like any other job that you get into. When you get out of college, a lot of times your career job is not where you start. You start where you are, but you have to be in a sustainable situation at that point in your life. So the issue is to clean up the inadequate designs in that production system so that anyone who works there doesn't get exploited. We're talking about systemic change in terms of the structures of an industry, not necessarily the personal individual that's working in it. Because if you correct the unsustainable practices in a supply chain, it'll take care of the worker who's working there.
Here's the
No, the first, the strike started in 78. The agreement was signed in 86. 86 was the first agreement. And I called up the Heinz Vice President of Industrial Relations, pretty interesting guy. His name was Harry Carroll. And I called him and said, are you the industrial relations guy? He said, yeah, that's me. I said, this is Baldemar Velasquez from Flock. Yeah, I know who you are. And I said, well, I just want to let you know that you're next. I just want to know if you want to fight or you want to talk. And he started laughing. And he says, well, I think when we watched the last 3 years of that Campbell's thing, it would be ridiculous to put our company in that position. So we'll talk. So he flew to Detroit. I met him there. And we outlined the first set of negotiations. And within 12 months, we had a signed agreement with Heinz. So. Singing. We did everything to energize ourselves. You know, we had an occasional cookout. And of course, we were always singing. You know, some of our best evenings after the picket lines were over, people bring out their guitars and their accordions, and we'd be singing songs. And that was pretty cool because I learned some good songs from the workers. Some songs that my mom would sing in the fields when we would be picking. I remember we were picking these potatoes that were really difficult. You know, we picked 7, 8 wagon loads of potatoes every day. And come around 5 o'clock, the farmer comes around. You know, we were there since daybreak, right? And it's 5 o'clock. We're ready to finish these last rows and go home, tired.
Okay.
Farmer says, say, Chris, 4 more rows. Yeah, they got 4 more rows to pick.
You're listening to a Zoom. Oh, it was the guy that works with
We
Frank.
didn't want to work anymore, so my dad would reluctantly agree, 4 more rows. But we were tired, and then my mom starts singing, right? And when mom starts singing, sort of picks up our energy, and it just revives us and to finish the day. And but my mom didn't know all the lyrics to these songs, so she would only know 1 verse or 2 verses. She'd sing them over and over again. And then in the picket lines, we found people that knew all the verses of those songs, and I finally learned all the verses to good old Mexican beer drinking songs. Sure. Be happy to do that. Let me take my guitar out, so. I only do this we perform publicly once a year in our Songs for Justice fundraiser, which is going up in, I think, November. Usually we have it in the November between Thanksgiving and Christmas, or pardon? No, we don't have a date set for it, but I'm already trying to get my musicians together. Let me find the right. Well, this song came to mind last night because I was up at St. John, Newfoundland 2 weeks ago, promoting this. There was a meeting of the North American affiliates of the International Union Federation, and it was up there. I knew several the national U.S. union president was going to be present, so I wanted to make sure that get their support for the Executive Council resolution that we once supported. So. Brought to mind the issue of Canadian migrant workers. It's an old favorite of mine going back to the 60s. And lonely, 7 seas that run high, all those things that don't change, come what may. But our good times are all gone away. I'll look for you if I ever. Somewhere to Alberta, where there's work there in the fall. Got some friends that I can go looking for. But I in your mind, if I ask you one more time, but we've been through this with times. From 7 seas that run high, all those things that come clean from my bay. But the times are all gone. I'll look for you out this way. Meet me the rising of the fair. But by then you would be returned for you to and it was when you came out there. That oh, came back. But I
I don't know why they don't do what needs to be done.
tell you that that's one of the things about
Because nobody wants to get their hands dirty.
record some of this music. And he did 2 fundraisers for us for the years. And he loved Mexican music. He really loved to sing, get everybody singing Decolores.
Yeah.
He had a big old sign with one of the lines of the chorus so that people could, try to say some stuff in Spanish. They see. This is in Spanish, but I just want to make sure that what you people represent to me is that you're not indifferent to the things, the bad things in this world. The first is that I not be indifferent to the pain of others. That I not be, the second verse, I not be indifferent to injustice. And that I not be indifferent to war. Because it is like a monster who tramples on the innocence of people. That I not be indifferent to treachery, where many people are misled, and not to forget what the treachery is. That I not be indifferent to the future, and sad is he who has to leave his homeland and live in an area that is a stranger. And then again, it repeats the verse about the I not be indifferent to war, because a lot of these things lead to war. En la reseca muerte no me encuentre, así y solo sin haber hecho lo suficiente. Y Dios, ser diferente. más que una gana y Dios. Pero la guerra me se te piso fuerte a toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. Es por nuestro grande piso fuerte a toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. Adiós. Quiero que diferente y un calor de más que unos momentos. Estos cuatro emociones me quedan vacíos y adiós. Diferente es marchar que tiene que marchar para vivir una cultura diferente. De la gente. Acabado por inocencia de la gente. Solo le pido a Dios. ¿Ah? Solo le pido a Dios. I only ask of God. Then I not be indifferent to these things. And that's you people. Thank you. Thank you.